when to use trailer, full, and bonus episode types. Thank you for joining me for the Audacity to podcast. I'm Daniel J. Lewis. A while back, Apple introduced the iTunes episode type RSS tag to let you mark individual episodes as bonus, full, or trailer types. And the good podcast hosting providers and podcast publishing tools also implemented support for that so that you could select that and not have to worry about the RSS tag or what you're doing. You're just selecting what episode type you want. But what do these different types mean and when should you use them? That's what this episode will be all about. If you'd like to follow along in the notes for this episode, they are a tap or swipe away, or just go to theaudacitytopodcast.com/episode types. First, let's talk about the obvious one, the full episode type. A full episode is a normal episode of your podcast. Any episode is actually assumed to be full if you don't indicate the type with that iTunes episode type tag. Thus, you probably will never need to explicitly define the full type because doing so is redundant and unnecessarily bloats your RSS feed. But if your publishing tool requires that you have to select full, bonus, or trailer, then if you're publishing a full episode, then just go ahead and select that full episode. But if you select nothing, Apple Podcasts and all the other podcast apps out there will assume it's just a normal full episode. I also recommend the full episode type for special episodes, like an interview, an in-between episode, one that's not a trailer, that is, or a special format and such. Some people might call these bonus episodes, but I really prefer the word special to better distinguish them from the more specific bonus type. So it's possible when you're thinking of, I want to release a bonus episode about this, that might actually be a full episode. But I will explain how to use the bonus episode type in just a moment. Generally, unless your episode definitely fits in the bonus or trailer types, it should probably be a full episode. And that's what most podcasts publish exclusively. So you probably don't have to worry about it, but maybe you have opportunities, or maybe knowing that there are other episode types can unlock some creativity for you and let you know that it's okay to publish content that's a bit different. Maybe it should be a full episode. Maybe it should be a bonus episode. But what is that bonus episode type? The bonus type is supposed to be a bonus to something. Bonus, 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 bonus. Boy, the more times I say that and the more times I read that in my notes, the less it actually has any meaning to me. And it starts to sound really weird. Just look at the word over and over and over again. It just seems like a weird word. But anyway, the bonus episode type is supposed to be a bonus to something that's usually content that already exists. For example, think about the bonus content you get when you buy movies. If you still buy movies, you get stuff. And by the way, this is the only reason I actually buy a movie these days, is to get the bonus content. That's behind the scenes content, interviews, deleted scenes, bloopers, and more. All this content makes sense only in the context of the other, probably already released content. You most likely don't watch the director's commentary for a movie if you haven't seen the movie yet. And you most likely don't watch the deleted scenes or the bloopers. Well, maybe you watch the bloopers, but most likely the other bonus content you don't watch until after you've already seen the movie, especially since bonus content can contain spoilers. And boy, I so wish some of the commentaries out there would keep that in mind, that most people have already watched or listened to whatever that thing is that they're spoiling. So to let the spoilers flow. That's a tangent there. So bonus episodes would use the same season and or episode numbers as that already released full content. And that's if you're using episode and season numbers. And this is because the bonus episodes are bonuses for that full content. They're not standalone episodes, although they may be separate items in the RSS feed and separate media file and all of that. They're not completely standalone. They don't make much sense without the context of the episode for which they're bonus. So I've mentioned season and episode numbers, and how this displays inside a podcast app depends, well, first on whether the podcast app even uses episode types, and then how it uses season and episode numbers. let's take Apple Podcasts, for example, because they're the ones that created this tag, and a couple other podcast apps are following on the trail that Apple has made in this particular way. Apple has a really helpful document that I've linked to in the episode notes about RSS tags, and in that document, they have a very concise explanation of what happens when you assign a season or episode number or don't for these. I'll expound on this a little as I quote from this. So first they say, quote, no season or episode number, a show bonus, unquote. This applies to your whole show, your whole podcast, if there is no season number or episode number for that bonus. Like if you have a podcast not about podcasting, so not the Audacity podcast, and you want to talk about how you produce the podcast. That's not a bonus for a particular episode or a particular season. That's a bonus for the whole show. Thus, that bonus episode could have the bonus episode type and have no season or episode number, and it would be considered a bonus for the overall show, where the assumption would be people listen to the show, not necessarily the entire show, but they listen to the podcast, and then that bonus will make sense with the context of your entire podcast. Then Apple says, quote, a season number, a season bonus, unquote. So if you put a season number alone, no episode number, but only a season number on a bonus episode type, that could be behind the scenes for a particular season, not an episode, not the whole show. Or maybe it's a bonus interview relevant to that season. And since seasons will include multiple episodes, you can release the bonus anytime you want within the season, just like you can release a bonus for your whole show anytime you want. You don't have to wait until you stop doing your podcast to release the bonus content. Same thing with the season. You don't have to wait until the season is over to release the bonus content for that season, unless maybe that bonus has some spoilers for things that happen later in the season. That's when you might want to defer it. But otherwise, you could publish the bonus anytime you want within that season. Then Apple says, quote, episode number and optionally a season number is a bonus episode related to a specific episode, unquote. So this could be follow-up questions and answers for a particular episode, like when the podcast How Did This Get Made has an episode dedicated to feedback about a previously discussed movie. Those feedback episodes where they are focused on a previously discussed movie could easily be bonus episodes using the same episode number as the already published content, because then that attaches it to that already published content. And the season number is optional because you might not be using season numbers. But if you are using season numbers, then still attach the season number to that bonus, especially if you reset your episode numbers with each season, like season 2, episode 1, season 3, episode 1, season 4, episode 1, that kind of thing. But if you have an episode number that continues on into the next season, so season 1 ends with episode 10 and season 2 starts with episode 11, then you would still assign the season numbers to the bonuses if you're using season numbers, because then that helps group things together properly. You would almost never use this bonus episode type for special episodes that merely break from your normal format. And I recommend that you try to avoid using the language of calling it a bonus episode, like saying, we've got a bonus episode for you, or something like that. For example, if you normally host a solo show, but you have a special interview between episodes, that would not be a bonus. Even though you might consider it to be a, quote, bonus episode, unquote, if it's not attached to any other specific content, it should probably not be marked as a bonus. It could simply be a special episode, and you could publish that using the full episode type. The Podcasting 2.0 spec might someday offer a special or extra episode type for these kinds of special or extra episodes, and I've proposed this, and maybe it will be taken into consideration for the standard. But if the interview in my example that I just mentioned is a follow-up interview for other content, for example, in my previous episode of the Audacity podcast, I talked about why you should stop saying brand names in your podcast and what you should do instead. So maybe, and I do not do interviews on the Audacity podcast, but maybe I someday wanted to do something and split time and space apart and do an interview again as a follow-up to that. Maybe someone had a particular success after they followed the advice I shared, or maybe they have some additional insight or things that they tested or data that they've researched and tried and all of the stuff that they might want to bring to my audience as a follow-up for that past discussion. Because that's related to that episode, it would be a bonus for that episode number, not a full episode. Or here's another example. You might have one episode about a movie, and then you have a follow-up episode later containing an interview with a cast or crew member from that movie. Or you have a bonus episode for sharing after episode feedback from your audience. Again, like How Did This Get Made does every now and then. These would be good uses of the bonus type. Bonuses are attached to probably previously released content. What about if that previously released content is long separated? What should you do then? Yes, you can attach a bonus episode to something you released a long time ago. For example, maybe you already published a movie review a year ago or a couple years ago, but you have new feedback about that movie or an interview with the cast or crew from that movie years later. This would be a good time to publish that episode with the bonus type, but give it the episode number of the original episode. That is, if you use episode numbers, and this might be a good reason to use episode numbers even if you never speak the episode numbers, because then these podcast apps will still be able to attach that bonus episode to that older episode by referencing the episode numbers. Most podcast apps, however, will probably play this bonus episode in chronological order according to its published date. But Apple Podcasts and a couple of other apps will group together all the episodes that belong to the same season. Even if they're published far apart and have many episodes between them, it tends to group them by their season. And still, though, probably sorted by the published date and probably not the episode number. But that might change, so just keep that in mind. And keep in mind that some of these things display completely differently. The best assumption is that it will be listened to and displayed in chronological order from when you publish it, maybe grouped by season. So that's the bonus episode type that comes generally after already released content. Now, the trailer episode type. We're mostly familiar with trailers. They're a preview of something to come. A trailer type episode is attached to something similar to how a bonus episode functions, but trailers are on the opposite side. Trailers are most likely for content that's not yet released. The trailer could be for a specific episode, a season, or your entire show. Again, looking at how Apple describes this concisely, and I'll expound on it a little bit more, when they explain the episodeTypeRSS tag, they say, quote, "No season or episode number, a show trailer," unquote. This would be if you want to promote your overall show. You could make or even replace that trailer for your whole podcast at any time. Now, it's great if you do that first in your podcast. So the first thing in your RSS feed is that trailer for your show. If you're able to make a trailer, it's a great thing to do. And then that can be what you use to launch the RSS feed into the podcast apps and catalogs. So it can be out there already gathering followers, maybe already even gathering some ranking, ratings, and reviews, even though it's only a trailer. But that trailer can announce that the podcast is coming and maybe even give the specific date for when the podcast officially launches with episode 1. And then later on, you might even want to replace that trailer with something that doesn't give a specific date, but still promotes the podcast as a whole, not a specific season or a specific episode. It's promoting the whole podcast. It can be released anywhere in your RSS feed. If it doesn't have an episode number or a season number, then it is a show level trailer, a trailer for your entire podcast. Then Apple says a season number and no episode number, a season trailer. And then they add a little note here that also applies to the bonus type as well. They say, note, an episode trailer should have a different GUID. That's one of the tags inside the RSS feed. It's a globally unique identifier. It should have a different GUID than the actual episode. So this type of trailer, when it has a season number and no episode number, is a trailer that builds hype for a specific season. And since seasons include many episodes, you could publish your season trailer at any time. But since you want to build up hype for something that's coming, it's probably best to publish the trailer before the season starts. and as soon as you can to give plenty of space from when that trailer is released to when the season starts. Then Apple says episode number and optionally a season number, an episode trailer/teaser later replaced with the actual episode. Now note that Apple seems to be recommending that you remove the episode trailers once the actual episode is released. And I think that makes sense. It's probably a good idea to do that because you wouldn't want to see a feed that's like episode trailer for the next episode trailer for the next episode trailer for the next episode, back and forth like that. Because if you're looking in the past, it just doesn't make sense anymore. Someone doesn't need a trailer for the episode that will play within seconds of when they just finished the previous episode. But if the next episode is still yet to come, that's a good reason to use the episode number and release a trailer for that episode number. So it would use the same episode number as whatever episode that trailer is for. And a trailer doesn't have to only preview upcoming content. It could also lead into it. For example, your quote trailer, unquote, could be a call for feedback to be included in the upcoming episode, like what Mark DeCote does with what he calls double take episodes for his podcast, the Rings of Power podcast, Tales from Middle-earth, which, as you can probably guess from the clearly communicating title, is about Amazon's The Rings of Power show, which just had its first season finale right before I recorded this episode. So if you're interested in a Rings of Power podcast that is heavily feedback driven, definitely check out Mark's show, and I have a link to it, and also the other podcasts I mentioned in the episode notes. A tap or swipe away inside of your podcast app or at the audacitytopodcast.com/episode types. So those double take episodes where he's primarily calling for feedback could be considered trailers for the upcoming episode number. So while bonus episodes come after content, trailers come before, generally. So should you leave a trailer online after the thing is actually published? I've touched on this a little bit here and there, but I want to dig into it a little bit more. Since trailers come before the content, you might be unsure whether you should keep the trailer online after the promoted content has been published. And the answer depends. I think trailers for seasons or entire shows should definitely stay online, especially since many podcast apps will give special prominence to these timeless trailers. And that's the key word, timeless. I highly recommend if you publish any kind of timeless content, that it should remain online indefinitely and remain in your RSS feed for as long as you can. So even if that means expanding out how many episodes your RSS feed can hold, if it's timeless content, I think it should stay there and be available for as long as possible. And so keep that word in mind, timeless. If it's timeless, keep it online. But if your trailer is time sensitive, then you should probably remove it when it is no longer relevant. For example, I released a trailer to announce when the Audacity to Podcast was returning from its long hiatus. Now, if you're a new follower to the Audacity to Podcast, you probably didn't know that it was on hiatus unless you actually look at the published dates and you see that, wow, there was a big gap between episodes, multiple big gaps between episodes, because I needed to take some hiatuses for personal reasons. But once the show returned, that trailer was no longer necessary because of its time sensitivity. It wasn't timeless. It was time sensitive. And if you heard that trailer now that the Audacity to Podcast is already back, it's just wasting your time to tell you, hey, it's back. It's like entering a house and then saying after you're there, hey, I'm going to come to your house. Yeah, you're already in my house. You see, it just doesn't make sense. So when a trailer is time sensitive, consider removing it. Here's another example. Going back to the Rings of Power podcast, Tales from Middle-earth, Mark releases short episodes he calls double takes, where he shares some very brief thoughts and proposes questions that his audience, and by the way, I'm among them, can answer before his next episode. He then includes that recorded spoken feedback in the longer episodes a couple of days later. These double take podcast episodes would be a good fit for the trailer type because they are leading into a particular episode. And if all that Mark did in those double take episodes was share the questions he wants his audience to answer, then he could probably delete those short trailer episodes after he publishes the full episodes. But if Mark's episodes also share some unique content, like I observed this thing, or I have this new theory, especially if he later references that in his full episodes, then it might be best to keep those double take episodes online because they contain unique content. They're not only a teaser for the next episode. In other words, if the purpose of the trailer is to essentially say, you'll get this content soon, then you could probably delete it after publishing the promised content. But if your trailer is for a season of episodes or for the whole show, or contains unique, nowhere else released, timeless content, then I recommend keeping those big picture trailers online. And you might even want to replace your whole show trailer or promo every year or two, or maybe even every season. So as you've probably noticed, bonus and trailer types are kind of like bookends. They are very similar. They're opposite to each other, but they function essentially the same way, just on opposite sides. They're both supposed to be attached to something. That could be an episode, a season, or the whole show. But the trailer comes before the thing as a teaser or promotion or a lead-in, and the bonus comes after the thing as some kind of follow-up. There might even be some more types in the future. Right now, full, bonus, and trailer are the only 3 types that Apple supports in their own proprietary iTunes episode type RSS tag. But I've proposed for Podcasting 2.0 to have its own podcast episode type tag with some extensions that would give at least an episode type of special and maybe more, like mini-series and rerun. And if you're interested in that and want to comment on it, propose some other episode types, or comment on the proposal, then I have a link to that in the episode notes. A tap or swipe away inside your podcast app, or go to the audacitytopodcast.com/episode types. Now, if you're looking at your podcast and you're thinking, I've made bonuses and trailers, and what should I do about all the past episodes, and what should I worry about with how this displays? Just hold on a minute. Don't obsess over this, and don't worry. The decision between episode types should not be a difficult one, and I really hope that this episode helps distinguish the episode types and their uses, so that you don't have to try and figure out, is this a bonus or is this a full episode? I hope I've made that easier for you, so you know right away, this is a full episode. It's a special episode, but it's a full episode until we get that special episode type from the Podcasting 2.0 spec. And while you don't have to update all your old episodes with these types, doing so would make your podcast look much better in apps that support episode types. But again, don't obsess over this, and don't worry too much, or maybe not at all, about this. You don't have to do this. But there is also an added benefit that if you do, well, Apple really likes seeing shows that leverage these episode types. So if you use these episode types in your podcast, you might even increase your chances of getting featured by Apple, because they like to show off podcasts that look good inside their apps. And using these episode types, season numbers, episode numbers, and that kind of stuff, when it's relevant to your podcast, that can look good. And this is not to say you should do seasons for your podcast, regardless of how you define a season. I'm not saying you should do seasons just so you can use the season tag. I've done an episode previously about seasons. I'm thinking of actually reapproaching that and giving some new insight into podcast seasons. So if you're interested in that, definitely let me know. My contact information is on the website, theaudacitytopodcast.com/contact. It's also in the episode notes for this episode, which you can find inside your podcast app, only a tap or swipe away, or at theaudacitytopodcast.com/episode types. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with another podcaster, or maybe you see a podcasting conversation in one of the online communities and you think this might bring some extra insight into when to use these different episode type tags, and maybe some future tags that could be included in the Podcasting 2.0 spec. Please share this episode. It's at that same link, theaudacitytopodcast.com/episode types. And now that I've given you some of the guts and taught you some of the tools, it's time for you to start and grow your own podcast for passion and profit. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from theaudacitytopodcast.com and the Daniel J. Lewis on Twitter. Thanks for listening.